a national robotics strategy, grocery prices continue to rise, and a data health check. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories, as well as news and supply chain trends on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. Hi, I'm Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by Werner. Unlock the power of a seamless connection. Werner Intermodal combines a massive nationwide rail network and cross-border solutions into Mexico with an expanding private fleet and total digital visibility. Secure your capacity today at choosewerner.com. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, our government has been wrestling with developing a national strategy for artificial intelligence, but another area that could use a similar strategy is in the area of robotics. Could such a strategy promote domestic robot manufacturing and help the U.S. win the automation race? To find out, Senior Editor Victoria Kickham welcomes today's guest. Victoria?
Thanks, Dave. Our guest today is Zach Tomkinson, Chief Commercial Officer at robotics company Standard Bots. He's here to talk with us about a movement to advance a national robotics strategy, efforts that involve reshoring the robotics supply chain and focusing on things like education, training, and financing for U.S. companies that develop robotics and automation systems. Welcome, Zach.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Nice to meet you both.
Yeah. Glad to have you here. I wanted to just start by asking you to tell us really briefly about Standard Bots. What specifically do you make, and in what industries are those products primarily applied?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are an American robotics company. We're based in Glen Cove, New York. We make a vertically integrated AI native cobot. Really, it's from tabletop-sized arms to what I like to call superhuman arms that lift up to 30 kilograms and 2-meter reach. And vertically integrated really means that we build the whole stack from hardware, motors, software, AI, and then obviously the AI native piece of that means our robots also learn through demonstration. You can show them what to do, they'll pick it up. They'll be able to actually take on that task. So it's a true learn by teaching. And cobot or collaborative robot means that it's also safe to work alongside of people, as a tool. And so for us, that type of combination allows us to automate really any industry. We work in all sorts of applications, so welding, machine tending, palletizing, packaging, really every industry you could think of, and those types of applications. And the types of customers we work with could be as small as a mom and pop shop that's right up the road from you that you've driven by 1,000 times that you can't remember the name of, all the way to the Fortune 100s, Lockheed Martin, Verizon, NASA, and we're now the largest U.S. industrial robot company that's here operating in America.
Terrific. Thank you. So your company's CEO, Evan Beard, recently testified in a congressional hearing about the need to advance a robots made in America strategy. I'm going to ask you kind of a two-part question here. What does that mean to you and to Standard Bots? And why is it important, and what would that entail?
Yeah. So we've spent a lot of time working with the government and in these congressional hearings and done many of them. And it's a very important thing, we think, more altruistically for the future of the country as a whole. And I'll take a step back and maybe give my perspective a bit, and then dive a little bit on what we've done exactly. When I think of the future and where we're headed, it's clear that robotics is the most important industry in the world right now. And we as a country have to be really, really aware of where this is going and how impactful it's going to become if we don't make the right decisions today. And I think when you look to thought leadership from other countries, whether that's Germany or Japan or Korea or China being the leader, it's clear they have a much better strategy today than we do here in America. You can look to China's 5-year plans, and it is heavily focused on robotics. And when you go back to 2013, we were shipping and deploying, most importantly, deploying in American manufacturers predominantly, the same amount of robots as China was approximately in 2013. Now, since then, they've been on an absolute skyrocket rampage, and they deploy now about 10 times more robots that we do per year. And in fact, if you look at like 2022 into 2023 into 2024, where China was like doubling in some cases year over year, or growing at tremendous rates, we were actually declining in number of deployments. It's very clear that robotics is the future, and we need to take it very seriously as Americans and for the future of the country. And so, very supportive of truly all everyone, in whether that's competition, whether that's suppliers. It's really important that everyone in the U.S. is focused on this, and that we add a lot more manufacturing ability, across the board.
I didn't realize it was that much of a difference. A crucial element of this strategy would be reshoring the robotics supply chain, right? I'm wondering if you could talk about, the sort of the specific parts, products, raw materials you'd like to see made closer to home, and where most of those elements are primarily sourced from today. I'm guessing it's China.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the global production comes from other countries, but mainly it's Japan, China, Korea, and Germany as well. Certainly, China is a very large portion of that. You're talking about servo motors and gearboxes and encoders, other sensors, and certainly PCBs. And I think that the challenge on this is that a lot of this tech is not even made in the U.S. And if it is made in the U.S., it can cost 4 or 5, even 10 times the amount that it does to get it from overseas. So we need to be able to make it cost competitive, and in many cases even just actually supplied here in the U.S. Like, I would say a large portion of what I just mentioned isn't even functionally made in the U.S. today at all.
So I imagine there are financial incentives that could help both with the reshoring efforts as well as, your earlier point about just building a stronger robotics manufacturing base in general. I wonder if you could speak to that issue, the sort of financial incentives and what would help.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that we have to look at being able to play both sides. You've got supply and demand, financial incentives. You look to say what China does. It's not just subsidies that they, provide. They also have significant government programs on the demand side. So on the supply side, 3 things that would really move fast: National Manufacturing Loan Program, modeled after the DOE loan program, which would ultimately have a low-cost financing covering up to 80% of the capital. That could be that same model scaled our U.S. solar program, and it also helped build Tesla's first production lines. A capital equipment credit like the CHIPS Act is another option. Refundable tax credits for the production of these, servo motors or gearboxes, or harmonics would be an option as well. But it also needs to be able to extend that depreciation to cover the integration and the training, because a lot of this is not just the hardware, it's the knowledge and the deployment, and the training of everything. And that is something that we also need to consider to depreciate as well. But then on the demand side, we need to look at being able to look at state enterprises and where they can make investments into robotics as well. We're starting to see a lot more of that, but I think it's critical that we make even more of a concerted effort and a plan around that.
So you just mentioned training. I was going to ask you about how labor comes into play, and what do you think we need to do in this country to sort of develop the workforce required to sort of create a stronger robotics manufacturing base?
Yeah, so I think that it's critical here that when you look at the number of unfilled manufacturing jobs right now, there's over 400,000 unfilled manufacturing jobs today, expected to be north of or close to 2 million in the next 5 or 6 years. And we can't really reshore production without the proper people to be able to run the factories. And I think to be able to run those factories, we need to leverage, manufacturing excellence programs to be able to train more people across the country to level up the skill set of the people and the type of technology that they can be able to deploy. So these manufacturing programs and excellence programs should be able to be a training resource locally to everybody, we believe, across the U.S., so that each state, maybe even each major county would have a program that people could come in and learn the best practices to be able to go back and then implement that on their factory floor.
Zach, I'm wondering, is there anything else you think that needs to be done to sort of advance U.S. leadership in robotics? Probably a lot, but anything I haven't asked you that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I think I just would, want to call out, if you look to the 2010s and how we navigated the solar panel business, this is indicative to where we're really headed now if we're not careful. It was a prominent technology for us, and now virtually all of that is wiped out of an American manufacturing base. It's all built in China today. If we don't act, robotics will ultimately go the same way. And so it's important that we look to take the right steps forward, especially from a national security standpoint too. A lot of these systems now with AI are using cameras. They're live streaming cameras. It's a think and decision making on a real second by second basis. It's a live action. And if those aren't under full security of American business, we do believe that that is a national security risk as well. The encouraging part of this ultimately is that it's genuinely fully bipartisan. We have all the talent we need. We have the ingenuity. We have the AI capabilities. Our specs can already outperform our Chinese competition. But what we really need is policy, capital, even customers, and the workforce to drive this as well. And if we can do that right, then we can take on this next industrial revolution. And as a country, we can win. And it's important that we are out there really spreading this word and trying to help other companies, other startups, get off the ground, other suppliers get off the ground, even other competitors get off the ground, because that's really what's best for the future of the country.
Did you get a sense from the hearings that you've participated in that there's sort of policy being shaped in this direction? I'm just asking off the cuff. Do you have a sense of where this may be headed?
Yeah, absolutely. We do. We anticipate there will be, significant bipartisan support here, and that there will be some significant programs coming down the pipe, and that this will help like fuel the next generation.
Terrific. Zach, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your insight on this topic.
Yes, thank you. It was great chatting.
Yeah, terrific. We have been talking with Zach Tomkinson of Standard Bots. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you, Zach and Victoria. Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. And Ben, last week we talked about how the Iran war is disrupting critical supply chains. And we know what's happened to gas prices as a result, but you report this week that prices are also spiking at our grocery stores.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we were talking about different modes of trucking last week and how they're affected by high gas prices. That seems pretty straightforward. Oil is so crucial for logistics, whatever part of the world you live in. But as we mentioned, we're starting to see some more sort of granular impact of that right now, specifically in a couple of reports this week about the impacts on Americans' pocketbooks here at home, specifically in the grocery aisle. So there were two reports, as I said, this week. The first one was from Blue Yonder, the provider of supply chain software. They found that consumers, first of all, they blame those rising grocery prices that they're finding primarily on higher freight and transportation costs. And again, due to those rising fuel prices, due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, all these dominoes that fall. So one of the main ways that those shoppers are reacting is to slow or stop their purchases of beef in particular. That's true apparently for 55% of U.S. consumers. And instead, looking for different types of protein to make a square meal, they're looking to buy more chicken, more eggs, or canned goods, canned proteins.
Right. And beef prices have risen for a couple of reasons, not just transportation oriented, but for a number of reasons. But it is interesting to see how price pressure can change what we all put in our shopping carts.
It really is. It really gets personal here, doesn't it? And we got confirmation of that trend actually from a second report this week. This one came from the consulting firm Bain and Company. they've been tracking a slow decline in American grocery shopping spend levels starting in the middle of 2025, but it really accelerated and dropped steeply starting in February of 2026, which of course happens to be when we started the war with Iran. The report from Bain said that among those shoppers who are trimming their grocery bills, 56% are trading down to lower priced brands. Close behind that, 49% are simply buying fewer items. And third place, 44%, were leaning harder on finding coupons and promotions. So the conclusion, because remember, Bain's a consultant, so that they're giving advice to the retail grocers, is that for those retailers trying to get back on the path to growing sales, there are three main steps that they suggested. One is to stock a wider assortment of goods. Second was offering promotions like those sales and coupons. And third was selling more private labels, which are typically cheaper than the name brands.
Well, that all makes sense. And as we're all tightening our belts, having some additional economic choices in what we put in the carts certainly helps, especially when shopping those legacy grocery chains that now have to compete with Walmart, Aldi, and other discount grocers.
It's a fast changing sector. So interesting to see it play out through a logistics lens.
Thanks for sharing it with us.
Glad to.
And Victoria, we often report on how cybersecurity is so critical for companies operating supply chains, but you reported this week on some startling numbers of just how vulnerable our supply chains are when it comes to cyber incidents.
That's right, I did. And this information comes from a recent survey of 500 IT decision makers. The results revealed that about a quarter of businesses, have suffered a cyber incident that originated in their supply chain over the past year. Now, this is despite being highly aware of the risk facing them. Nearly half of those surveyed said they have continued working with suppliers despite known resilience or security concerns. These results are compiled in a report called Data Health Check 2026. The Data Health Check is an annual report from a United Kingdom-based company called Data Barracks, which provides backup, disaster recovery, and business continuity services. They surveyed firms from across the UK in a range of fields that included technology, banking, finance, retail, manufacturing, transportation, and a host of others.
But Victoria, those percentages do seem high to me, especially with nearly half of companies saying they would work with suppliers despite having security concerns. Did the report say why companies continue to do that?
Yes, and in many cases, organizations simply lack viable alternatives, so they're kind of a captive audience, I guess. More than a quarter of those surveyed listed dependence on suppliers as a main barrier to improving their supply chain resilience. There were a couple of other statistics that stood out as well. Supply chain vulnerabilities were identified as one of the top 3 challenges facing organizations over the next 5 years. It was cited by 23% of the respondents. And that comes just behind AI-driven cyber threats at 46% and ransomware at 26%. So supply chain issues are right at the top of the list of concerns for most people. The survey also found that organizations that knowingly work with risky suppliers were more than 4 times as likely to experience a supplier-originated cyber incident. 43% of those organizations experienced an incident, compared with just 10% of those that did not knowingly work with risky suppliers. So important to know your suppliers, obviously.
Yes, it is. And I think that's the key, is knowing who you work with and making sure you can trust those partners, and then also having the right cybersecurity tools and procedures in place to protect your own data.
Exactly. And the report also digs into visibility. Often companies have great visibility to their primary suppliers, and it gets, less so as you go down the chain. So that's an issue they address as well.
So maybe try and work with a supplier that can provide you better visibility is a key.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more of these and other supply chain stories. Also, check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And we'd like to thank Zach Tomkinson of Standard Bots for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded each Friday. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by Werner. Unlock the power of a seamless connection. Werner Intermodal combines a massive nationwide rail network and cross-border solutions into Mexico with an expanding private fleet and total digital visibility. Secure your capacity today at choosewerner.com. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.